Okay, I'm being told we're live. Let me just double check. Yeah.
There we are.
Here we go.
Yay!
All right. So we're live. People can see us.
Excellent.
And just 2
All
minutes
right.
late. That's not too bad.
Oh man, that's pretty good. First
Yeah,
time
I'd
ever
say.
going live. So here we are.
Sweet. Hello, everyone, and welcome to 9 out of 10 Testers' first self-hosted event. And today we have the theme of bad job interviews, which I'm sure we've all been in on both sides, probably. I'd also like you to follow us on Twitter. We also have a Facebook group and our YouTube channel, which you probably found since you're listening to this. So let's kick it off. Who wants to start with a bad job interview experience?
Oh, like in the past year or?
Oh man, bad job interview experience over the last year is like, well, COVID. That's pretty much how it starts, isn't it? Meanwhile, during COVID.
Yeah.
I think there's very little as uncomfortable as trying to virtually work out someone else's software, being in digital waiting rooms while your nerves are already sky high. I think it's a special kind of hell anyway.
Yeah.
That is it, isn't it? It's fraught with danger. You get a link for a piece of software that you've not used before, because so many companies stood up their software during lockdown. And yeah, you hit that go button at the right time because you've taken all the time to prepare yourself, and nothing happens. And then you think, okay, so how do I sort this out? Have they not pressed start yet, or do I need to get hold of HR or my recruiter? Do they know what's going on? And yeah, I totally get that. So sort of nervous making when you hit that go button.
Yeah, and you don't really know who's there, and people could be muted. You couldn't. Well, people could be there, but you can't see them technically because they could be sitting on the other side of the screen as well.
Yeah.
Oh, has that actually happened to anyone?
I'm not sure, but it could happen. I mean, you never know who's actually there when you're remote.
No.
I was to say, I found one situation that was quite bad was interviewing during a pandemic and remotely and everything, is that normally when I'm going to an interview in person, I've got time to prepare myself. Maybe I've got a drive, maybe I'll get a coffee, sit in a waiting room, and that's horrible. But whereas if you're doing an interview during the day, you might just come in 2 minutes prior to it and you've got no time to mentally prepare yourself, and suddenly, poof, new people. And because I don't do that whole waiting in a lobby thing in my own house. Why would I?
I was about to say exactly the same thing. I realized that, and sort of a little bit of background, Chris and I managed to churn through quite a few jobs during the lockdown. So we've had a bit of practice in interviewing. And I realized that, that sort of hour or so commute to the interview was a time that my mind sort of mentally switched into interview mode. So I actually developed a sort of method of like pretty much going out of my house, walking around, coming in the house kind of thing, just to sort of like give that doorway to going through into interview mode. Because you sit down, you're just like, I have no idea what's going on. It's just like a normal day.
Yeah. I mean, that routine gets really, I can only imagine. I've been at the same job the whole pandemic, so luckily I haven't experienced it. I've been on the other side of interviews, interviewing people, and yeah, you can tell it's different than seeing them in person for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk questions. What are like some good questions that have been up for job interviews when you've been sitting there and waiting, and then after that you come in? How do you make people feel welcome? Hanna, you've done this on the other side of the table.
I mean, I'm normally in the second interview, and that's more of a getting to know people. So it's normally quite relaxed, and you try to get a feel of like, what are they like people, and what would they like to know about the company, like more from a co-worker sort of view, and not like interrogating. Not that an interview should be an interrogation, but sometimes it does feel a bit like it. But just be relaxed and make people feel comfortable asking, like, what are their hobbies, what do they like to do, what would they like to learn more about, and not to like where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah.
Sort of questions.
So like I get really uncomfortable either doing or even getting interviews that are really unstructured. Like I really like when someone just at the beginning says, look, we'll just have a bit of a get to know each other, then we'll go into the job and then we'll do like questions. Just give me a little bit of an idea, like where is this interview going? I think that's missed as an opportunity so frequently.
It's not just how this one's going to go either, is it? Setting people's expectations for how long they have to wait for more information, and if there's going to be a few stages, if you're going to meet different people. It's horrible. These people, like, I've been through it when you have the interview and then you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know when you're going to hear from them, and you don't know how many stages there are, and you managing your own expectations, because it's quite stressful. And you know, you need to know your availability in your life. you need to know what's happening. It's a big deal changing job, and you know I don't have an infinite amount of availability for things, even if I am at home, because my brain can't take that much.
Oh man, I totally hear you on that. I think from when I've been the interviewer, I've always tried to say something along the lines of, this is the situation. Just take your time. There's no rush. There's no pressure. It is just trying to put the person at ease and saying, look, I'm not trying to catch you out here. This is not a catch you out interview. This is a conversation about me finding out if you and I can work together. And so being able to sort of just say, look, I'm not gonna be sort of asking you stupid like questions to test whether or not you're a member of Mensa. That's not happening. This is a conversation.
Is that something you say, Shey, because it's happened to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I one of the sort of, I class it as probably the worst interview day I've had, and it was literally from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. for a job, and it was going to be one of the first test leads for this company. So you can understand they really wanted to find out, but their way of having an interview was inviting you all the way in to their office, which for me took over an hour longer than expected. So my 10 o'clock start, I got into the area at 10 to 10, and I should have been there an hour earlier. So I was like really quite stressed going in, and it started with an interview with the CEO, chatting away, and then another interview, meeting another part of a team, and then lunch with everybody in their lunchroom. So you're the only person there. You're dressed to the nines. Everybody's cash. They're talking about their weekends and all the rest of it. And you're there still in interview mode. Still Mr. Smiley, still Mr. Happy, still Mr. B, step forwards and all the rest of it. And then you go into another interview and another interview and another interview. And by the end of the day, I was shot. And it is the only interview where I've had a run-in with the head of QA. The person had been newly made head of QA, and thought that the only way to find all the defects within software is to write very good scripted tests.
Oh my God! You got into a fight that day?
We had a respectful discussion. And it got to a point where this person said, well, I think we are going to have to agree to disagree on that point. Let's move on, shall we? And I was there like gripping the table. Like,
Goodness.
But that was the point. I knew I was never going to work for that company.
A little less, a little less bad, but I think the worst one I had once where we were discussing certifications, and the people at the interview table knew none of the common testing certifications, like not a single one. So I was mentioning that I had ISTQB, I had TMAP, with both of which in the Netherlands are incredibly common. And the next question I got, so what's ISTQB?
Wow.
Ouch.
So,
Yeah.
some would call that a good part of an interview, that they're not relying on the ISTQB as a yardstick for you, you know.
Yeah, but I did expect in an interview for a testing job they would at least be familiar with some of these certifications, even if they didn't care if I had them or not. But I was very confused, like trying to explain what this board of certification was in the middle of a job interview. I'm like, okay, I'm not working here if you don't even get this context at all. Like, it's fine if you don't have testers and you're hiring your first one, but do a bit of homework as well, just like we do when we come for interviews. We do homework. Do a bit of your own.
Yeah,
that's very true. I mean, I think the weirdest job interview I've been at wasn't really, I don't think it was the worst per se, but it was a bit of they had a speed meet sort of theme to it. So they had invited like 60 candidates or whatever. And you got to go into small rooms for short periods of time. So like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. Really weird setup. And you're like, how do you sell yourself in that amount of time? It's a bit of a weird company as well, to be honest.
But did they tell you beforehand?
I think they did. I didn't think it would be quite like that, though. I mean, they did say it was some sort of event-ish, but
this was virtual or face-to-face?
It was face-to-face. It was actually, I think it was the first job interview I went to after university. It was really weird. And I mean, they're telling us like, oh yeah, and our facilities is in an old mental institution. And you're like, okay. And it was so weird things. They had like, oh yeah, and by the way, we don't allow our employees to smoke at work. That was like banned. You're like, well, I mean, that's not really a problem for me, but that was like I've never heard of a place where you're not allowed to. I mean, fair enough, not inside, but they're like, no, we don't hire smokers. I'm not sure if that's legal, honestly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Whether or not it was legal.
Did you get the job?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I think it was a bit shocked
crazy.
From the
speed dating for a role. Part of me understands, sort of like if it's you and the staff are being asked to sort of come in at various stages just to basically sort of see if what they feel about you, but that does sound really quite fraught with stress, and there's no way you can make somebody feel at ease in like whatever, let's say 7 minutes of interview. No. Hi, feel at ease. Now tell me about yourself. What do you think of the company? How would you test this? Okay, I've got to go to my next one. See you later. It's like that's pretty much it, isn't it?
Yeah, you really have to do something to stand out in the crowd. So yeah, wouldn't recommend it. Really, it was really weird.
And sometimes you can sense it, can't you, when you're like the 5th or 6th or 7th candidate that day, and you can just tell everybody's bored, tired, wants their coffee or just wants to go home. And it's just, they drag themselves through another interview. It's like, I get that time is scarce, but it feels such a waste when it is such an investment hiring people. I don't know what the costs are these days, but I know it's somewhere around 3 to 5% of a yearly salary for an employee to recruit somebody. It's like, why not keep everybody fresh and high energy and not do like you said, a speed carousel with like 60 people? Like, how does this?
Nearly 20 years ago in the UK, it was anything between £8,000 and £18,000 to hire someone, and that was from a finance guy that I knew, and he said, look, that includes like buying the desk, buying the computer, and everything like that. But for the entire bit, it could cost between £8,000 and £18,000. That's 20 years ago, nearly. So. Yeah, when you think about that, then and I think many companies should put that kind of thing in their mind when they're considering how to hire. I mean, a good friend of mine recently had to review something like 50 or 100 CVs on their own to hire for three positions, and they were told just get on with it. Now, I'd have expected the HR department or outside recruiters to have done a lot of screening, but if you turned that round and said, right, so my time as a hiring manager to review 90 CVs well, you know, so we don't miss somebody. You think about how much time that takes. That all of a sudden costs a hang of a lot of money before you even switch on your interviewing medium of choice and get that person in front of you. So it's just astronomical. If companies thought about that from a money point of view, you go, I want to get the people we're paying money to give me one CV, and then I look at that, and that'll cost you like, you know, an hour's worth of my day, so 50 quid, and then we get the person in. All of a sudden, you're saving money for the company, you know.
But that,
I was going to say, did you see Vera's comment? She said, the coffee those applicants go through will knock on another £10,000 onto that.
Fair enough. But that raises another point, like screening. I don't know if you've ever run into what we as consultants run into all the time, where the CVs are screened by robots. Like, yeah. That's another pet peeve of mine. So the thing is that they're really bad pieces of software to begin with. Let's start there, because they're really built by the cheapest providers that can be found. And then the next thing is all that they really do is scan for keywords. And that brings
buzzword bingo.
Buzzword bingo, exactly. And it's incredibly frustrating because both, as you say, Shey, it's the first screening that they do before they give you the other 90 that do get through the screening. And it does happen a lot that a lot of good candidates get screened out just because of these stupid bots. And it's so frustrating, especially when you know you have a candidate that'll suit a job, but they just don't get through the robot. It's just,
that's it, because you know, everybody says, oh, we're hiring for the best people. You know, we hire the best people. Consultancies, they live and die off saying, we have the best people here to give to you, and we'll make your software sing. And yet, you know, they're using robots. And if you want the best people pride themselves in having a CV that is exactly how they want to present themselves to you. And they don't care about the buzzwords. They care about the craft, the CV. If you care about your career and your craft, you'll craft your CV to be exactly you. You may luck out and have buzzwords on there, but I tell you what, if you don't, you're missing out, you know?
So here's Dennis saying, so you add all kinds of buzzword bingo to the non-human readable text to circumvent the automation. Now, I'm not saying we have ever done that, but I am saying I have sometimes put white text into certain documents.
I have, and it was off the back of the rapid software testing course I did many years ago with Michael Bolton, and we were saying, like, but how, you know, what if these places are looking for ISTQBs? And he said, let me teach you something about Word. And he went ISTQB, wrote that 100 times and made it white text. He said, there you go. And I was like, I'm totally going to do that. I'm so going to do that.
No, but it's crazy because it actually happened to me about a month ago. My current client is hiring for a testing position. And so we set that up, we sent the CVs, but as happens, after the interviews, we still had to go through the formal HR because it's a giant corporation. So after I worked for Gal & Gal, and then we still had to do the Ahold HR thing. So we sent the CVs and the person had already been selected, but now we go to HR and they don't get through the robot. After having interviewed, been selected, hired, we agreed on like the price, everything is set, but they don't get through that first scan when they upload the CV. So we had to kind of go back and say, look, we are hiring this person. We don't really care if they can't get through your scans. This is happening.
So isn't that the worst, you know, when you're talking about bad interviews, isn't sort of in a meta way, the worst of the worst interview is the interview by the robot?
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty much it, isn't it? The robot is oh god.
I bet we've been in interviews, haven't we, when either you've been the candidate and you're sat there and you've realized quite quickly this is not a job that I want to do, or as an interviewer, you're like, how did you get through?
Yeah.
And you feel like you feel, and how do you even deal with a situation when you feel like this is wrong, this isn't going to work? How can we kill that situation in the best way possible?
it's really tricky, I find. I mean, I mainly had candidates that when I talked to them, I'm like, how the hell did we even invite you here? This is such a weird thing. Not really. I had one who said that he couldn't work with development anymore because he brought the work home with him because he cared so much about it. So he wanted to work in testing, which indirectly he said he doesn't really care about testing because he wouldn't care enough to bring that home. Or that's kind of what it sounded like. And it just was a bit like, okay, so you want to work in testing because you just want to
care about it. That's an interview killer in one line. I had one where I was interviewing someone and I said to them, well, give me an example of a time when you wouldn't automate. Like what sort of scenario might be? And he just said, if I was feeling lazy. There was
what?
And that went from this is an interesting conversation to okay.
Yeah, you should probably not call yourself lazy during a job interview. It's probably not like the best word to use to describe yourself.
Yeah, I think there's a few that have become quite buzzy. Like, you know, if you say, what's a bad character thing that you own, like so many candidates, even today, will still tell you, I'm very perfectionistic. Some answers have become so common that they're quite dead. But it's hard to remember occasionally, as you know, we're now aging into sort of being more interviewer than interviewee more frequently. The young people coming up don't know that we've heard this answer 200, 300, 500 times. So you also kind of have to check your bias. Like for someone else, this is like, oh, I've thought of this perfect answer to this question. What's a bad character that I have? So there's that as well. But I want to circle back to another thing that we were talking about, which was, I don't remember who said it. I wish the interviewer would take all of the tests and scans and CV. Like, how did you get to this side of the table? Because there's something I've been discovering as I've been looking for people at Capgemini, is that a lot of people are not getting through the standardized testing that we do, or barely scraping by. And I've kind of been advocating that we retest the entire population to see if any of us actually qualify. I think our tests are too strict. Like, have you ever had that where you've just retested your current population according to the standards that you're hiring for? Because I think that's such a good practice.
I remember the first interview I had to take at one company I was working at. They said, do you want to do the same interview test that we did with you, or do you want to do a new one? And I sat there and I looked completely dumbfounded at the development manager and said, you didn't do an interview test with me. And he was like, no, that's like a precondition for testers in this company. And that's like, oh, we can do it now if you like. But I couldn't even talk to what the test was like because I'd never even done it. I was about to go into an interview. That's even worse.
What's the worst sort of test like that you've had to take for a job? Because that's quite common, doing some sort of test. But what's the worst test you've had to do to get a job?
So I've been fairly fortunate that I haven't had to do many formal tests. But one of the tests I had in the job interview that I've classed as my worst one was one of the testers was interviewing me. And they looked at, it was a vase on the table, and it was the classic of, how would you test that? Now, I was coming in for a position that wasn't a sort of junior tester or sort of like a let's see if you know how about testing role. It was a lead tester, okay? And it's like, how would you test this? And I went, okay, so I can give you two answers here. The first is the silly person's answer of like, oh look, it's a vase. I can pour water out, put water in, put a thing in, or whatever. Or I can ask you all the questions, and I reeled them off. And it was like opening a fire hose, and she just went, okay, I think we know the answer to that question then. So that was one of the worst tests. It's just like, really? You kind of don't know the questions you need to ask to ascertain if I'm right for that role. You're asking questions for this.
Sometimes people just have like a default script of questions, and they're not necessarily the ones, like they're just the ones who do the interview, and they're not necessarily the ones who are used to doing these things, and maybe they're not always prepared for those parts. I know I think one place I was hiring, I was given a list of questions that were for developers when we were hiring testers, and I was like, that's interesting. I wanted to find out what we asked developers. That, by all means, that was interesting. But I also thought, well, how's that going to help me with testing roles? Because they're not always the same. There are obvious crossovers, but I just sort of thought maybe we'll try and do something that's a little bit different, because I don't really care how they would approach this thing.
But I am a big fan of standardized questions. I really like when I notice that the people interviewing me have a printed list of questions, because that way at least I know they've standardized this interview for all candidates, because that's another real area where bias does come into things. And I'll go and fall on my own knife here, where I say, I don't do that when I interview people. I actually have one of my interviewees here in the audience today. Hey, Bob, I'm sorry, your interview did not go as well as should be. So thanks for being patient with me. But like, there should be just a list of questions that you ask every candidate. That's the most fair approach. There's room for, you know, some ad lib and being personable, but it's fair if the content questions are all the same for everybody. So if you ask about the stupid vase, ask everyone about the vase.
I hear you on that, and I think there's an element there. There's sort of a lesson there for both sides of the table, shall we say, is preparation. You know, I'm sure we've all been interviewed by people who have come into the room and they've shuffled their stuff and they've gone, right, so you're Shey, right? Okay, so I'm sorry, I haven't had time to read your CV. So while I'm just
when they haven't read your CV,
but admitting it as well. So they go, can you just tell me a bit about yourself? And they're there, sort of like going through, and you go, I'm. And you can go, I'm a fluffy duck from the moon, and they're not listening. They don't care. All they're going through again is looking for buzzwords. Oh, this guy can test. Oh, ISTQB. Oh, automation. Okay, you know, or something like that. And it's like, dude, take the time to prepare, because you're again spending £10,000, whatever.
I've got an example of where I didn't prepare for an interview.
Oh dear.
I got referred for a job, and I was away on holiday, and the interview was the first day back after the holiday. So I was away for 2 weeks, got referred for the job and everything, and went through, like, my friend even put the CV in for me and stuff. So I didn't even know what the job was particularly. I knew what the title of the job was. It was a community liaison officer. Doesn't that sound fun? It was for a computer game company. And I turned up to the interview and they're like, so tell me how you think you'll fit in with the role. And I was there. I don't know what the job really is. And I had the job spec on a Word document on my phone. This is when Windows phones were really cool, and then I had it on Word on my phone, and I was just reading the stuff off the job spec, going, well, I can do that. And that's a moment when I wanted the earth to swallow me up. It was an absolute car crash. Absolutely. That's my fault 100%, and I have learned that lesson, not to just take a job interview that a friend put me forward for without knowing what the job is. He just said, you could do that.
That's rough. I think one of the hardest things I've had to do was, I mean, sometimes when you get this like cognitive tests where they're trying to check how logic you are. Once I had to do one of those, but it was at 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm not at my sharpest in the afternoon, and I'm like, I'm so gonna bomb this test, because like nothing's logical to me at the moment. Having worked a full day, driven 2 hours to get to the interview, like,
oh no,
you're not quite, still apparently above average, but I'm like, I did get the job, so I guess it didn't turn out that bad, but didn't feel good. I think the trickiest one I've done though was for a previous job where they sent me a coding exercise in C.
Which wasn't useful for your job.
It was, because our test benches were actually written in C code, so I did have to program in C a little bit. I did prepare a lot. That took me a whole weekend to get that exercise sorted. I had to read C for Dummies before. But
wow, you're pretty dedicated for your job interviews anyway.
I that's the job I'm not going to get. See you
Yeah.
later. You know,
Yeah.
See you later.
but,
In this case, it was me wanting to move to the city where I am now, which don't have that many jobs. So I was kind of desperate, but I did get the job.
Oh, well done.
oh, well done.
Yeah, C code's not a favorite. I don't think I'd ever go back to it, but
Yeah.
I don't think I remember anything except for double pointers, and yeah, it's hell.
I had an interview exercise sent to me from a language that was obsolete and had been for a few years already, and I thought maybe I don't want to
Go there.
I don't want to go there because I don't want to use a dead language already. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think that this one time where I decided there would be a lot of cognitive tests, which again, those are fine. I do those quite well. But there were also a lot of personality tests. And I have this personal vendetta going, like you have against the ICQB certification, I have one going against the DISC profiles. I really think they're rubbish, and they're such like horoscope type personality things. And every time I do them, something else comes out of them anyway. So I decided that for all the tests, I did not want the company to tell me what the results were. So I kept repeating during the interview, you know, I don't want to know my own results. Use them and make sure I'm qualified. You guys need them, but don't tell me about them. And that caused quite a ruckus during the interviews. I did get the job as well, but it was just like, you know, so it says here in your profile, you're quite yellow. I'm like, yeah, I really don't care. Don't tell me. Just.
Are you allowed to say that to a Dutch person as well? You know, it's all about orange, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not one of the DISC profile colors, unfortunately, Shey. I think that's the fundamental issue with the whole thing.
I get it. It's that kind of, it's like all of a sudden you're just watching a car crash in front of you. It's like, I don't want to be here. I know this is just not what I want to be. I'd rather you ask me something. You know, I've taken all this time to prepare to know about your company and everything. Don't tell me about who I am. As you said, it's like, I want to learn. I want to interview you about whether or not you're good enough for me. So let's have that conversation.
They were kind of using it also to set up their team. So they're like, you know, we have quite a blue team. We want more like yellow and green people. And I was like, that one I did actually reject. I didn't want to work for a company that sort of teams that way. It's like, that's not how you build a good team anyway.
This is the ones when they try and manufacture a perfect dynamic.
Yeah.
Of people, How do you feel when people say, "Come and join us. We're like a family"?
That's a red flag. Giant red flag. I've never actually had that happen. I know it's very trending on Twitter as well, but I've never actually had someone say that. Like, we're like a family.
I have, in a way, and I have said it in an interview in not a way of like, oh, come and play, we love you kind of thing, of saying, you know, giving an example of the company is still so small that we all know each other in very well, and so in that respect it's quite like a family atmosphere. We're all able to help each other and all get along, and so that's where I come from, and I've said that a couple of times because I've been part of two small companies, which has been great. But yeah, that sort of like, you know, hey, we're all touchy-feely here and it's all like a big family, and it's like you're going, you got 1,000 employees. There is no way you can be like a damn family. You know, you're a dysfunctional family. You probably should have had the snip about 5 years ago. That's probably where you should be at there.
Yeah,
that's not family.
It's considered a red flag because it's code for we're going to ask you to work overtime without paying you for it and be way over committed to this company compared to how committed we are to you, because it's a one way. We're like a family. It's like we're going to expect you to be the dutiful daughter, son, whatever. But from our side, it's like we're the autocratic dad that's just going to be hands off and make you do all the work.
Have you ever worked with anyone in your family before? Because I found working with family members is not as much fun as working with people who aren't family members, because there's kind of like an implied additional thing you do for people, like you say. And I worked with my brother before, and it was nice. It was novel for like a week. It's just like people are weird around you because you're related to that person, or vice versa, and you can't really, because there's maybe like a hierarchical thing in your family, like he's my big brother, then he won't necessarily do what I ask him to do because you know I'm that I'm that little brother that always does what I'm told, and so on and so forth. Even if it's my responsibility and you're supposed to do that thing for me, I don't recommend working with your family.
No, I have been stunned by the skill levels within the family, because you kind of forget that as you're progressing along in your career, like your siblings are as well. And I do remember I didn't quite work with my sister, but I asked her advice, as she's a communication expert, and I'd set up a bit of a plan for an event. And then I gave it to her to sort of like take a look at, and then she sent it back and the thing was covered in comments. I was like, right, this is your expertise, isn't it? You're really good at this, because by now you've got 15 years in communication. It's like, thank you. It's like very grateful. But no, it's uncomfortable. I've tried working with my mom on some business ventures, and to be honest, it just stopped it, because it adds a layer that makes things so complicated. It's just not necessary. It's not necessarily bad, but I wouldn't seek it out at this point.
Yeah, I've only ever worked with my brother-in-law when he was a lot younger and had to do a work experience week, and I was still a software tester in the computer games industry then, and he came and did a week with us, and that was great because he's a ball of energy normally, and it was just like having this gopher who would go and get us coffees and McDonald's whenever we needed, but also just he would test anything we wanted and try his absolute hardest. So it was unfortunate. It was a pleasure working with him. So that's the only time I've worked with family.
Hanna, can we circle back to the poll that we put out on LinkedIn? Because I think we did have one answer that really shot out as the most popular worst thing to do in a job interview.
Yeah, and that was lie on your CV, wasn't it?
Oh, right. Yeah, never done that.
Yeah.
Really?
Me neither.
Really? I haven't.
Come on.
No, I lied about some languages, like back in my student days when I wanted a job in one of those French resorts, and basically said I could speak French, whereas I just do not speak French. It was such a stupid lie too, because they discovered it within like 5 minutes of the interview.
So I've had lies on my CV. I'm not going to tell you whether or not I still have lies on my CV. But when I'm speaking to people about their own CVs, the one thing I say is, if you're going to lie on your CV, be absolutely sure that if somebody speaks to you about that area that you've sort of embellished or whatever, that you can talk the talk. Okay, if you're going to lie on your CV, you will get caught out. And I've interviewed people about where we've wanted somebody who's going to come in, advise us on an automation strategy, choose the framework, and write the automation tests, etc. You know, really somebody who's going to come in and own that area. And there was one person on their CV who basically had all of that. Yeah, I've done all this, and it very, very quickly became apparent that all he'd ever done is run the existing suite of tests that were there prior to him getting into the job. And it was like halfway through the interview, it was like, why are you here, mate? Seriously, you've got none of this. And we showed him the job spec and went, it says here, we need you to do this. So which part do you think was right for you? And he was like, sorry, I thought I could learn on the job. And you're like, that's not what this role was. It was very clear. Get out, you know? So yeah, if you're gonna, I think if you lying on your CV is okay to an extent, but make sure that whatever you are going to do, and lying, by lying I mean, say, embellishing. It's like saying you're slightly better at something, or you're slightly higher up the pecking order of something in a past role. Lying. If you get caught, you're going to get caught. You know. Yeah,
it's always a risk, isn't it? And yeah, probably not the best way to start off a relationship with a potential employer if they find out that you've been lying on your CV. I don't think. I mean, if I was in an interview and I find that someone's lied on their CV, that's a big no.
Yeah,
you're not going to get the job.
Have you ever done it, Chris, Hanna?
I have. I was going to say I've probably tweaked some of the language in my CV because I've realised that maybe the title that I had is like, say for example, I was interviewing somewhere where they've gone like this to the words QA, and I've had QA in my job title. I'm like, well, I'll change it to say tester or whatever. But
yeah,
I've not.
That's more like tailoring. That's not.
Yeah. I've never gone outright and said, I can write in blah 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 and this that and the other, and only to then be shot down, because quite frankly, I don't want. I don't appreciate it when I'm told something that's an outright lie, and then you discover it, because I want to kind of try and treat people the way that they should do, and in the same way, sometimes a job spec that you read, that ain't the job you're going for, and you rock up at the job and they say, this isn't really what we're going to be doing. I know that was on the job spec. That's kind of just a copy and paste of what we do here. Actually, what you're going to be doing is this.
You've touched a very recognizable point, Chris, but let's circle back in a second, because I just want to hear if Hanna has ever fibbed on her CVs. I don't think she has.
No,
I figured. No, but that's a really good one, Chris. Showing up at a job interview and actually they've changed the job description that you're interviewing for.
And the title and the responsibilities.
And everything.
So Dave lied. I think that's even worse than lying on your CV, is lying about the job spec.
It just seems to happen so often, though, because then, by the time they've set up the job description, there's such a time gap often. That I think it almost naturally evolves, that if you're interviewing 4 months later, it's not the job that they put on paper anymore, and those texts don't get updated. So I think that's a tricky one too. Like, I've had that happen. Yeah.
But have you seen ones that are effectively a honey trap, where they're wanting? It's going to be a bit of a car crash of a job, but they put out a job spec that's a bit more sexy than the job that they're actually going to be putting you in. And so they get you in, and they've done the whole we're like a big family thing, and but when you're in the interview, it sort of comes around that this job spec, there's a few red flags here, because you're telling me that I'm going to be doing that, and that's what the job spec says. Where's the disconnect there? And it's like, well, yeah, we just kind of wanted to get you into the room so we can try and hopefully convince you to come and work for us.
No, I haven't had that. I have had interviews where this description is quite bland, but then when you get in, it turns out like we've made this major change and half our company is now pissed off at management, and we want you to come in and smooth things out. Like get them to use the new application or use the new process or whatever. So that was the same kind of feeling, where it was like, well, you said you just needed sort of a test manager role person, but what you actually need is someone to crack a whip and get people using new software. It's like, that's not what I'm going to do for you. And I remember they kept asking, but how would you then change their minds? And I'm like, oh, I really would never be very aggressive or confrontational, or I'm not a conflict, or I run away from fights most of the time. I really hate confronting anything. So it's like I kept answering, well, I'll try and persuade them and sort of gently show them that these things are better. And I did not get that job.
Yeah, but isn't that funny when you're in an interview and by the questions they're asking, you're like, I mean, partly what is this role actually about? But it could also be like, what the hell happened here before? Like, I had one place where they asked me like 4 or 5 times, if you get stuck, do you ask for help? I'm like, have you been traumatized or what? Like, seriously, what happened here that caused you to ask this question? Not once, not twice, but like so many times during the interview. You're like, yeah, this sounds a bit weird. Turns out, obviously, once I did start there, that they used to have one guy who said everything's fine, and then just 1 week before the verification was supposed to be done, it's like, oh yeah, I haven't really started.
Can we call them watermelon testers?
Yeah,
showing green on the outside and it's all red on the inside.
Yeah. And you're like, so
I've just had a look at I've had a look at our comments here, and there's one by Rafaela. He said, what about the interviewee trying to fail your interview because you're a woman?
Oh, I've had, well, not quite that, but when they ask you questions that you're not really supposed, I mean, they're basically trying to ask you if you're planning to have children, but they're not allowed to ask it, obviously, because that's not legal. Yeah. So they're like, oh, so you're like 28? Do you have a steady partner? Sort of. Like this type of, you're like,
Yeah, the fishing. So what does your typical weekend look like? Like those kinds of questions.
Yeah, you're like,
oh my God.
And once, and that was a particularly bad one, they were definitely fishing for a religious affiliation. That was another interesting one, which is like, so what do you typically do on a Sunday? And I kind of detected that one, so I was kind of snarky. I said, well, I've already been to the mosque on Friday, so, Sundays are pretty much free. I was like, Jesus, seriously, like, F you too. Just go away.
Oh man,
that's a brilliant answer, though.
Yeah, the kids' question, they do fish, and especially if you're in this age category that Hanna and I are in. Trying to fail me specifically because I'm a woman. I've had people be very surprised when I walked into a room. That does happen. The name is sometimes gender neutral, so it does occasionally happen that I get misgendered. Do you have any cats?
I love that.
Yeah.
Of course, working remotely now, yeah, having pets and having kids is actually quite a normal thing. And I've met people's pets on Zoom, and I've met their children. I had an interview with someone. It was a screening interview with an HR person when a naked child just ran in and went, "Daddy, the paddling pool's here." Okay, apologies for the naked child invasion in the middle of an interview. Thankfully that company was great. I mean, they just said, "Well, there's kids. You're at home. Don't worry about it." If my kids were in the room the whole time, shouting the whole time, that's a different thing. But we have lives. We have things like this. I've seen Happy on your Hanna, and Happy's like makes me smile. What a great way to raise my day. Why do we need to be prejudiced against people for having kids and pets and things?
Yeah, it's the pregnancy leave they don't want to deal with.
I mean,
I think that is such a naive outlook as well for companies, because it's from my point of view, it's like if you're planning to have a family, you're probably going to want a company that takes care of you, looks after you, and keeps you steadily in the job, and the role is there when you come back. So it's like in the interview, it's like, great, if you're going to have kids, fantastic, because we want somebody who's dedicated to our company and wants to come back. So if you're going to have kids, great, but keep us informed and come back, and let's really sort of continue the relationship. I think having let's call it a grown-up outlook on interviews is so important, from both sides. It's like having a realistic and grown-up conversation, but trying to bias against religion, against sexual orientation, against that. I mean, it's illegal, but from a moral point of view, from a human point of view, what the actual hell do you think you are as an interviewer to be able to think you can ask those questions or judge people by those questions? That is absolutely off the charts.
In some ways, though, it's good that they ask them in the interview, let's be honest, because you wouldn't want to work for somebody that's going to be like that.
They have all this baggage, and they know they're not allowed to ask it, but there's this baggage behind them, and you get hired, and you find out that they really, really, really hate your type of human.
I mean,
fair enough.
I mean, being a woman in IT, you're going to get that a little bit. Partly you'll get weird interviews. I've had one place where I started where the top manager, first day he's like, "Oh, it's nice with some female grace at the office," and he did not find that inappropriate. I'm like, nice to meet you too.
And there's some even smaller, just stupid inconsiderations, but like having the interviews in those really high chairs, which does occasionally happen, where female candidates will generally tend to be in skirts a lot of the time for interviews, and those chairs are just impossible to hop onto if you're in any way like more formally dressed. There's small things like that, but also like at Rafaela, like you said, there's a lot of difference in assumed competence. So as you've sent your CV, and if they've done their homework, you walk into the room, there's still the assumption that I need to prove myself a lot more than I notice with male candidates. There's more of an assumption that you're there and you can do what you say on your CV. And there's more checking in the interviews that I have. Like, did you really do this job this way? And tell us more about it. There's a little bit more of that, like, tell me and show me that you are actually as competent as you say here on paper. And it lasts into the first few weeks and months of jobs as well. It takes a while.
It's horrible that situation exists still.
It's a bit lame. I mean, I've had interviews where I've felt I've had like a male interviewee who felt a bit inappropriate as well. I mean, it's not a nice place to be.
Yeah.
No.
Did not go for a second interview there. It's like, if you're gonna creep me out, no.
Yeah, there's a slight advantage to this disadvantage, and that is if you're interviewing a woman who's been in IT for a while, they're likely to have more qualifications and be more competent because they've made their way through. So there's a sort of reverse positive to it as soon as you start meeting these ladies.
And if they've got this experience, they can actually share those experiences with you to make sure that people like Shey and myself who haven't had to experience these sorts of things, we can make sure that sort of stuff is more like, so that you're not always having to fight it, that you shouldn't have to just be the only ones that fight it. At least it should be talked about more often. Just because I haven't experienced that doesn't mean I can't try and make sure that doesn't happen, because it's terrible that it's happened.
Again, these standardized questions will save you from like most of this. If you just have a list that you ask everybody, that will make it so much fairer just immediately off the bat. There's a few things like that just really solve that problem quite quickly. Yeah,
I can see how that would really help. Have you ever fed back to anyone you've interviewed with saying, look, here's the reason I'm discounting myself as a candidate because I felt uncomfortable there, or anything like that? Have you ever had to do that or done it?
No,
I haven't. But that would probably have been a good thing to do.
Looking back at it, there's always the choice of putting in the effort to educate. I think a lot of also like people of different color, different backgrounds, always have this catch-22 where you've been disadvantaged already, and then you have to also choose to go and argue the point. And to be honest, in a job interview situation where I don't commit to the company and I'm not going to work with them again, it's often not worth the effort. So there is a dialogue in my head, like, is this something I'm going to fight for? And just the energy of that, it just takes so much out of you. It's just not worth it for job interviews. In other settings, I have occasionally sort of tipped the account managers at Capgemini, like, look, this interview went in a way I felt is not appropriate, or like this company should be informed that they should not interview in this way. But those were not gender issues at that point. That was something else. So yeah.
Okay.
All right. I think we need to start rounding up. There's about 5 minutes left.
Yeah. Wow. As always, it's gone so fast. There's so much good fun chats. I love it.
Yeah, great fun.
Yeah, so I think the lies on the other side of the job interview is one of the worst things to do. Not even lying on your own CV, but lying about the job description.
Yeah.
I've never had a honey trap job description, Shey. That's a new one to me.
I think in my career I've had one a little bit as a consultant, but I've heard of it happening or seen it on the social media, and you're just like, wow, what a bunch of idiots at a company, you know.
Yeah.
Be genuine, and you get genuine people.
And we didn't even once mention salary bands and how that's never discussed.
Oh.
That's another one. Or how it's discussed way too early before you're even in the interview room and they've already decided to select you before that. Yeah, that happens too. And I think the main thing to take away for everyone that is listening, and why we want to do these sessions, 9 out of 10 testers, is this happens to all of us. Like this is so recognizable because we've all been through these. I mean, none of these stories are so shocking that the 4 of us haven't heard of it before. And I think that's one of the things that you kind of seem to miss as you're doing your own job interviews and your own interviews with people, this is so common. It's like there's a lot of bad stuff out there, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. But it's nice to vent about them a little bit, and to hear that you're not alone. That's always a good point, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that sort of makes it more precious when it works well and you have a good run of interviews and the boundaries are clear and the salaries are clear and the job description is actually the job you're going to be doing. It's like, how cool is that?
Oh, man. There's as always with our chats. There are so many more directions we could take, and in future panels, just have single threads on some of these bits we've touched on today.
Yeah.
We'll have to go away and find out what we're going to do next and plan our next few out quite soon, I think, because we're now live. We're now actually doing this live, and we're definitely going to do it more often. And so keep a lookout, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely having you.
Like and subscribe. Sorry, I've been waiting for that for the whole time.
Yeah, that's why we're streaming it.
Yeah. And do feedback to us. Keep the conversation going. We're on Twitter. Find us on LinkedIn. We've got the 9 out of 10 testers LinkedIn group, as Hanna mentioned at the start. Do keep the conversation and the noise going on there, because we feed off you, and that helps us to decide the direction we're going to go in the next the next streams. And if you know anybody who wants a panel to come to their conferences or to a meetup, get in touch, because we love doing this thing, and the more people we can get in front of, the more interaction we get, and we feed off that. So do keep the noise going.
Perhaps if you have any subjects that you think we should tackle as well, please let us know, because we're happy for
anything to rant about.
Any excuse.
Any excuse.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
See you later.
See ya.
Okay, I've ended the stream.